So a little bit about who Sigmund Freud was and how he came into psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud was basically an Austrian neurologist, and he was born in the 18th century in Moravia, which is actually now currently in the current period, it's Czech Republic. If you've heard of Prague or traveled to Prague, then that's the area. And when he was a young boy, his family actually moved to Vienna. And he was born to a traditional Jewish family. And at that time, if you are aware of the history of Europe, then you can imagine that towards the 19th century, towards when early 1900s, there was already a situation of Hitler and the Nazi camps, and Jewish people were already quite in danger and being exterminated from Europe. So that's the era that Freud lived in Europe. So, like I said, when he was 4, their family moved to Vienna, Austria, because by that time, Czech Republic was already going through a lot of turmoil, and it was originally Moravia and then Czechoslovakia. So there was a lot of unrest in that area, and a large part of it was because of the oncoming World War II under Hitler's regime. Now, his father was a wool merchant, so they were pretty well off for those days. I mean, Freud never grew up in lack of money, and his mother was actually his father's second wife. And he had 2 elder siblings from half siblings from his father's first marriage. He had no siblings from the current marriage, but from his father's first marriage, he had 2 half brothers, I think. And his own mother was, since she was his father's second wife, she was about 20 years younger than his father. And as I said, they were not really wanting for money. They were a pretty well-off family. So reportedly, Freud had a nanny to look after him. And he was very close to this nanny. And apparently there have been, in scriptures and in books about Freud, there has been a confusion about whether it was his mother or his nanny who actually played a very big role in determining Freud's eventual theories. His theories were quite based on a maternal figure or a motherly figure, and the obsession the child has with this maternal figure in his life. And there is speculation about whether it was actually his mother that Freud meant or related these theories to, or was it actually this nanny? Because apparently he had a very, very close, almost childlike and a mother-like relationship with this nanny of his. And, also his relationship with his father was not the best. And this seems to have played a very big role in his mind, in his theories as well, especially when you talk about the Oedipus complex, which we are going to come to later on in the presentation. Now, when he was 17, he entered University of Vienna, which is till date one of the most leading universities in Europe for psychiatry, neurology, and psychology. So I do believe very strongly that that era started at the time Freud was there, because Freud was later on even teaching there for quite a while before he moved to United Kingdom. And he actually went into university to study medicine. He wanted to become a doctor. And he did. He eventually became a physician, but he was more interested in neurology. He especially wanted to see the connections between neurosynapses and neurological function and hysteria. At that time, if you're aware of a little bit of European history, neurology was a upcoming subject. At that time, there was no MRIs and CT scans to look into the brain and look into what was happening. So there was a lot of fascination around, and it was neurology was a newly discovered thing, that there are specifically brain cells called neurons, which are responsible for most of your cognitive functioning. And this new discovery kind of became like the talk of the town, and everybody felt that everything you did and every behavior you had and every psychiatric problem you had was somewhere related to neurosynapses malfunctioning in the brain, and that actually leads to mental health problems. Now, hysteria was quite rampant at that time. Now you have to understand this word hysteria. If you look at it today, there is no such thing as hysteria. We don't really diagnose any patient as having particularly hysteria. You can have hysteria as one of the symptoms or paranoia, but you don't really diagnose a patient as hysteric. So hysteria was the general diagnosis given to any patient who was not falling under any other diagnosis at the time. So, for example, you had dementia, you had Alzheimer's, you had memory loss, you had autism. These kind of disorders, they were, not really having these names, but they were kind of well known. So anything that didn't fit into these 5 or 6 well known diagnoses was given the term hysteria. So if you had somebody who with schizophrenia, you had somebody with severe depression, severe anxiety issues, personality disorders, they generally tend to categorize everything as hysteria. And at that time, Freud was especially fascinated with hypnotherapy. He tried a lot of therapy as a neurologist on his patients, and he started to notice along with his colleague that while doing hypnotherapy, if he helped patients to recall traumatic experiences from their childhood, that it seemed to help the patient's symptoms. He tried very hard during his career at University of Vienna to convince his counterparts and his colleagues that there is something to this more than just neurosynaptic malfunctioning. It's more than biology. There is a psyche or a human mind or component of the mind that is not tangible material, but actually more matter that we don't know what it is made of. So what I think he was trying to say was that there is this concept of a soul or an emotional soul that is actually more responsible for these psychic behaviors, and it's not all biological malfunctioning. And he was ridiculed and he was castricized and he was made fun of in the scientific society for his ridiculous thoughts. I don't blame people because apparently Freud was a cocaine addict. So that's apparently one of the reasons why he was, a lot of his apparently theories were written under the influence of cocaine. So we don't know. But now his theories are revered all around the world as some of the best psychoanalytic theories. Now, what he eventually saw through these hypnotherapeutic sessions was that patients felt really good after talking about their traumatic experiences. It tended to reduce the symptoms of hysteria. And he eventually referred to this as the cathartic method or the talking cure. We often use the word catharsis in psychology. Catharsis is actually a word written by Freud, and he used this word to describe the extreme expulsion or explosion of energy from in the psyche of a person from the unconscious mind outward, when you have a particularly difficult confrontation with your past, and you talk about it in front of somebody and you experience that extreme you know release of energy and emotion through that process of talking, which is why a lot of us even today feel very good after having a good talking session with our best friend or somebody who we trust. That's where this word catharsis came from. And he had, especially since he was a neurologist, he had especially an obsession with nervous diseases, and he combined that with his extreme interest in hysteria and the psychic mind and the psyche, and he started to develop a theory on psychoanalysis and on the model of the mind.